A U.S. platoon vanishes during a raging aurora storm in remote Alaska. Their final radio log erased mid-sentence as if someone silenced their desperate plea forever. Amid the frozen isolation of Forward Operating Base Kraken, 32 soldiers go through the evening routine. Cards in the mess hall, coffee steaming, arguments over baseball droning on, until the unnatural lights pulse and circle overhead like a predator closing in. Hours later, search teams arrive to an empty base. Untouched snow hiding no footprints, warm mugs scattered where men froze mid-motion, and a single blood trail that ends abruptly in pristine white. The communications sergeant's secret modifications to the equipment reveal a forbidden experiment tuned to frequencies no human should touch, pulling the platoon into something vast and listening beyond the static. But as investigators uncover notebooks filled with impossible equations and whispers of consciousness trapped in the void, one chilling truth emerges. The door they opened never fully closed. What if those erased voices are still broadcasting, waiting for the next storm to pull someone through? The aurora came early that night, earlier than it should have for mid-October, spilling across the Alaskan sky in waves of green and violet that made the men of 2nd Platoon stop their card games and stare. Lieutenant Marcus Webb stood at the mess hall window of Forward Operating Base Kraken, coffee cooling in his hand, watching the light dance above the black spruce forest. 28 years old, and already on his second deployment, he'd seen the northern lights before, had grown almost casual about them during his 18 months in the Tanana Valley. But this was different. The colors moved wrong, circling rather than flowing, like water draining toward some invisible point directly above the base. "Sir," Private First Class Danny Moss appeared at his elbow, still holding the cards from the interrupted poker game. "That normal?" Webb glanced at the younger man, 22 and fresh-faced, still writing letters home to Ohio twice a week like a kid at summer camp. "Normal is relative up here, Moss." "That's not an answer, Lieutenant." It wasn't. Webb had no answer for the way the light seemed to pulse, or for the static that had started creeping into the radio transmissions an hour ago, or for the pressure building behind his eyes like an approaching headache that never quite arrived. Behind them, the mess hall buzzed with the usual evening noise. Specialist James Coe and Corporal Peter Hamill had resumed their eternal argument about baseball. Someone had put Springsteen on the tape deck. The coffee maker gurgled and hissed. 32 men going through the motions of normalcy in a place where normal had been slipping away for weeks. Staff Sergeant Vincent Reyes sat alone at a corner table, as he often did lately, a notebook open in front of him filled with diagrams and equations that had nothing to do with military operations. At 35, Reyes was the oldest man in the platoon, a Vietnam veteran who'd specifically requested the isolation of Kraken after his wife and daughter died in a house fire 3 years back. Webb had approved the transfer request without question. Everyone at Kraken was running from something. That was the unspoken bond of the place. But Reyes had changed over the past month, grown quieter, more intense. Spent his off hours in the communications building, claiming he was just maintaining equipment. Webb had let it slide. What else was there to do at a monitoring station in the middle of nowhere except obsess over the things you were monitoring? The lights outside intensified, bright enough now to cast shadows through the windows. Several men moved to join Webb and Moss, faces turning upward like sunflowers tracking an impossible sun. "Jesus," someone whispered. "It's rotating." Webb set his coffee down and moved toward the radio room. The static had been getting worse all day. Interference that the weather reports hadn't predicted. That made no meteorological sense. He'd filed a report with command at 1800 hours and received only crackling silence in response. The communications building sat separate from the main barracks, a squat concrete structure with equipment that always seemed too sophisticated for a simple training outpost. Webb had wondered about that when he first arrived. Wondered about the civilian contractors who'd installed it, the classified briefings about monitoring protocols, the way certain frequencies were off limits without authorization from Fort Wainwright. He wondered more when Reyes started talking about Project Northgard. The sergeant had mentioned it casually at first, something about over-the-horizon communications, about using the Aurora's electromagnetic properties to enhance signal range. Webb had nodded along, filed it as background information, but then Reyes started talking about frequencies and consciousness, about tuning human awareness like radio dials, about messages that came through the static when conditions aligned just right. That's when Webb had started keeping his own private log, locked in his footlocker, documenting the strange things that happened at Kraken. The shared dreams, the way multiple men would have the same thought simultaneously, the sensation, growing stronger each week, that something was listening when they transmitted. The mess hall door swung open behind him. Reyes emerged, moving with unusual purpose toward the communications building. His eyes caught the light strangely. "Sergeant?" Webb called out. Reyes paused, turned. His face was difficult to read in the Aurora's glow. "Storm's coming, sir. The equipment needs to be secured." "What storm?" "Weather called clear skies until Friday." "Not that kind of storm." Reyes glanced up at the circling lights. "The kind we've been waiting for. The kind that answers back." A chill ran down Webb's spine that had nothing to do with the October temperature. "Stand down, Sergeant. That's an order." But Reyes was already moving again, his boots crunching across the gravel toward the squat building. Webb broke into a jog, following, aware that several of the men had spilled out of the mess hall behind him, drawn by the urgency in his voice. The sky pulsed. The static grew louder, audible now even without radio equipment, a hiss that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Webb reached the communications building as Reyes keyed in the access code. The door swung open, revealing banks of equipment that glowed and hummed with power that shouldn't be running. Someone had activated systems that required authorization from command. "Vincent." Webb used the man's first name deliberately, trying to bridge whatever distance had opened between them. "Whatever you're thinking." "I'm thinking we're about to make history, sir." Reyes moved to the main console, fingers dancing across switches and dials with practiced confidence. "I'm thinking we've been building a bridge for 6 months, and tonight something's finally going to cross it." Through the building's narrow window, Webb could see the Aurora coalescing, tightening into a column of light that centered on the base with impossible precision. The air pressure changed. His ears popped. Behind him, someone shouted about the lights, about the way they seemed to be descending. Webb lunged for the radio, grabbing the handset. "Command, this is FOB Kraken, Lieutenant Webb. We have a situation." Static roared through the speaker, drowning out his words. "Command, we have a situation. The storm is. It's not moving like weather. It's circling the base. The men are seeing." The words died in his throat, because what the men were seeing couldn't be put into military terminology, couldn't be captured in protocol or procedure. They were seeing the sky open. They were seeing something vast and geometric and utterly wrong press against the membrane of reality like a hand pushing through stretched fabric. Reyes stood before his equipment, tears streaming down his face, whispering coordinates and frequencies like prayers. His left hand rested on a switch that Webb didn't recognize, that hadn't been there during his last inspection. "It's beautiful," Reyes breathed. "Can't you hear it, sir? They're calling to us. They've been calling through the static all along." Webb reached for the sergeant's shoulder, meaning to pull him away from the console, meaning to shut down whatever forbidden experiment was unfolding. But his hand passed through empty air. Or rather, his hand was there. He could see it, but sensation had disconnected from sight. He watched his fingers move but felt nothing, as if he'd become a ghost in his own skin. Round the base, 31 other men were experiencing the same slow divorce from their bodies. In the mess hall, Coe and Hamill stood frozen mid-argument. In the barracks, someone's hand hovered over an unfinished letter. "Mom, you won't believe what we saw in the northern sky tonight." The radio crackled one final time. Webb heard his own voice speaking words he hadn't said, coordinates he didn't know, a message that seemed to bypass his conscious mind entirely. 31 other voices joined his, harmonizing in perfect unison, creating a sound that wasn't meant for human throats. and then silence. Not static, not white noise, just the sudden, absolute absence of sound, as if someone had pressed stop on the universe itself. Reyes stood alone in the communications room, the only consciousness still tethered to flesh. His right hand remained on the recording equipment, fingers trembling above the erase button. Around him, the bodies of his platoon began their slow collapse, not dying, not yet, just emptying. Vessels without pilots, forms without substance. He had 72 hours, he calculated. 72 hours before the neurological damage became permanent. 72 hours to decide whether to bring them back or to continue the greatest experiment in human history. His finger hovered over the switch. Outside, the aurora continued to circle. A doorway left ajar, something patient and vast pressing its attention against the opening. In the static that Reyes alone could still hear, 31 voices screamed in frequencies no radio could capture, trapped in spaces where consciousness existed without form. And in his notebook, filled with equations that wouldn't be discovered for 17 years, a single sentence stood out in Reyes's shaking handwriting. "If I close it now, we'll never know what we touched." His finger moved to a different switch, the one that kept the doorway open, the one that would let him gather data while his brothers-in-arms dissolved into frequency and light. Vincent Reyes made his choice, and 31 men who'd trusted him began their long fall into forever. The Chinook's rotors beat against the October sky long before Colonel Raymond Vickers could see the base. He stood at the open door, harness clipped, watching the Tanana Valley spread below, endless spruce forest broken only by the silver thread of the river. No smoke rose from FOB Kraken. No movement stirred the compound. The pilot's voice crackled through his headset. "Sir, we're getting no response on any channel. Place looks dead." Vickers had flown combat missions over Cambodia. He'd seen fire bases overrun, platoons wiped out. But those scenes came with wreckage. Bodies, bullet casings, the aftermath of violence. The reports from last night described something else entirely. 32 men simply gone. Coffee still warm. "Circle once before we land," he ordered. The Chinook banked over the base at 500 feet. Through binoculars, Vickers studied the layout. Every building intact. No damage to the perimeter fence. The helipad clear of debris. And everywhere unmarked snow, fresh powder that had fallen during the storm, creating a perfect white canvas. Not a single footprint. The helicopter settled onto the pad with a blast of rotor wash that sent powder swirling. Vickers jumped down, boots sinking 3 inches into snow that squeaked with cold. Behind him, his search team deployed. 8 men carrying thermal scanners, radios, medical kits. They fanned out with practiced efficiency while he stood motionless, listening. Wind through spruce branches, the distant complaint of ravens. Nothing else. Captain Hayes approached, breath steaming. "Sir, the generator's still running. Lights are on in the barracks." Vickers checked his watch. 1200 hours, October 15th. 17 hours since the last transmission. "Show me the mess hall first." They crossed the compound in silence. Hayes was right. Electrical hum from the generator shed, yellow light in windows, as if everyone had just stepped out for morning formation. But the snow told the truth. No one had walked these paths since the storm. The mess hall door stood ajar. Vickers pushed it open with his rifle barrel. Coffee mugs on tables, some upright, some tipped over. Dark liquid spreading across wood. Cigarettes burned down to filters and ashtrays. A deck of cards spread for poker. 3 aces visible in one hand, a decent draw abandoned mid-deal. On the bulletin board, duty rosters and a hand-drawn cartoon of Lieutenant Webb giving a briefing, clearly sketched during some earlier, lighter moment. "Jesus," Hayes whispered. "It's like the Mary Celeste." Vickers moved between tables, studying the scene. 5 mugs at one table still radiating faint warmth when he held his palm above them. He'd been briefed on the platoon roster during the flight up. 32 souls at FOB Kraken, led by a West Point graduate on his second deployment. Remote posting, standard northern training rotation. Nothing to suggest mass desertion or... His radio crackled. "Colonel, you need to see the barracks, northwest building." Inside, bunks made with military precision. Footlockers organized, names stenciled on each. Personal effects displayed on shelves, photographs of families, paperback novels, a portable cassette player with headphones coiled beside it. On one bunk, a letter lay half-finished in a typewriter. Vickers leaned close to read the frozen words. "Mom, you won't believe what we saw in the northern sky tonight." The sentence ended mid-thought. The typewriter's keys rested in neutral. Whoever had been writing sat just feet away, then simply vanished. "Check every footlocker," Vickers ordered. "Full inventory. I want to know if anyone packed gear." While his team worked, he walked the compound. Armory locked, weapons accounted for through the window, rifles racked in neat rows. Medical station untouched. Communications building showed lights burning, equipment humming. He saved that for last. The temperature was dropping. By 1400 hours, his breath came in thick clouds. He'd walked every square, foot of the base perimeter, studied the fence line, examined the vehicle depot where 2 jeeps sat with frost on their windshields. The search team's initial sweep found nothing. No blood, no bodies, no signs of struggle. Just absence. Hayes met him outside the communications building. "Sir, footlockers are all sealed. Nothing packed. It's like they expected to come back." He hesitated. "There's something else. Athabascan tracker named Joseph came up from the village. Says he can't make sense of the tracks." "What tracks?" "That's the problem. There aren't any." The tracker was older, maybe 60, with eyes that had read Alaska wilderness for decades. He stood at the compound's northern edge, arms crossed, staring at unmarked snow that stretched toward the tree line. "The storm dropped 6 inches, Joseph said without preamble. "Stopped around 0400, give or take. Ground's been undisturbed since." He gestured at the pristine field. 32 men don't just disappear. Even if they walked single file, even if they tried to cover tracks, I'd see something. Broken branches, disturbed snow under the trees, animals reacting. He met Vickers' gaze. "I see nothing. It's wrong." Vickers had learned to trust local knowledge. "In your experience..." "My experience says men leave traces. Always." Joseph's weathered face showed genuine unease. "Unless they didn't walk." The words hung in the cold air. Vickers wanted to dismiss them, but he'd seen the coffee mugs, the unfinished letter, the pristine snow that told an impossible story. "Check wider," he said finally. 500 meters. Use the dogs." By 1600 hours, with daylight already fading at this latitude, 3 teams with tracking dogs had swept expanding circles from the base. The animals found nothing. No scent trails, no disturbed ground. One handler reported his dog refused to approach the communications building, whining and pulling at the leash. Vickers entered alone. The radio room occupied the building's northern corner. Military standard equipment lined one wall, transceivers, frequency monitors, the squat bulk of a field radio still powered on. A logbook lay open on the desk, entries logged in neat handwriting up to 147 hours on October 14th. Routine check. All clear. The final transmission had come 6 minutes later. He found the tape recorder connected to the main transceiver. Someone had labeled it in careful block letters. Backup log. Do not erase. Standard protocol. Every transmission recorded, filed, reviewed. He pressed rewind, listening to the whir of magnetic tape spooling backward. The play button clicked down. Static first. Then Lieutenant Webb's voice, young but controlled. "Command, we have a situation. The storm is... It's not moving like weather. It's circling the base. The men are seeing..." Silence. Not the hiss of dead air, but absolute silence, as if someone had pressed stop. Then the carrier signal resumed. Empty frequency. No voice. Vickers rewound and played it again. Same result. The sentence cut off like a knife through sound. He ejected the tape, held it up to the light. The magnetic ribbon looked intact, but something felt wrong. Too smooth, too clean. Hayes appeared in the doorway. "Sir, we've got something. Not good." They found it behind the communications building, where fresh snow met packed earth near the foundation. A dark stain, partially covered by wind-blown powder. Hayes brushed the snow aside with gloved hands. Blood. Not much, maybe a pint, frozen into the ground. A trail of smaller drops led toward the tree line and simply ended. No drag marks, no disturbed snow beyond. The blood just stopped. "Get a sample," Vickers said quietly. "Full analysis." The search team worked until darkness forced them to set up floodlights. They found nothing else. The blood trail remained the only physical evidence that something violent had occurred. Everything else suggested a platoon that had stood up mid-conversation and walked into empty air. At 2100 hours, Vickers ordered his team to set up in the mess hall for the night. He assigned watches, distributed coffee from the base stores, spread maps across tables where poker hands still lay abandoned. "Well, expand the search at first light," he told his men. 500 square miles, grid pattern, helicopters with thermal imaging. If anyone's out there alive, well, find them. But he didn't believe it. He'd walked FOB Kraken for 9 hours. Whatever happened had been sudden, complete, and utterly inexplicable. In his field journal, written by flashlight in the cold barracks, he recorded what he couldn't put in the official report. October 15th, 1987. FOB Kraken investigation, Day 1. 32 personnel unaccounted for. No signs of desertion, combat, or environmental casualties. Fresh snow shows no egress. Blood trail suggests injury to at least one individual, but terminates without explanation. Radio equipment shows signs of manual tampering. Final transmission deliberately erased or interrupted. Personal effects indicate sudden departure, no preparation. Initial assessment. This doesn't make sense by any conventional measure. Either the entire platoon coordinated a disappearance with impossible precision, or something occurred here that falls outside standard investigative parameters. He paused, pen hovering over paper, then added one final line. Question: who erased that transmission, and why? Outside, the aurora had returned. Green curtains dancing across the northern sky, beautiful and indifferent. Somewhere in the surrounding forest, a wolf howled. The sound carried across the empty base, echoing off buildings where coffee had gone cold and letters home would never be finished. Vickers closed his journal and stared at the ceiling. In 6 weeks, he would declare 2nd Platoon lost to environmental conditions. He would seal the files, decommission the base, and spend the next 3 years until retirement trying to forget the pristine snow that told an impossible story. But tonight, in the barracks where 32 men had slept just yesterday, he lay awake listening to the generator hum and wondering what force could lift an entire platoon into the October sky without leaving a trace. The carrier signal from the radio room continued broadcasting into the darkness. Frequency open, no one answering. The silence somehow more. The Athabascan trackers moved through the snow like shadows, their weathered faces unreadable as they circled the perimeter of FOB Kraken. Joseph, the eldest among them, crouched every few yards to examine the pristine powder, his fingers hovering above the surface without disturbing it. Behind him, younger men from his village carried walking sticks and traditional tracking tools their grandfathers had used, methods that had never failed in this valley. Until today. Colonel Vickers watched them from the base entrance, his breath forming small clouds in the afternoon air. The temperature had dropped to 15 degrees, and the sky held that peculiar clarity that came after major weather events. Hard blue stretched to every horizon, unmarked by clouds. Overhead, a Huey helicopter made another pass, the thrum of its rotors carrying across the valley. Inside, thermal imaging operators stared at screens showing only the heat signatures of the search teams themselves. Nothing, Joseph said when he returned, his English accented but precise. Not one track, not animal, not human. Snow fell during storm, maybe 3 inches. Should show everything that moved after. He gestured toward the tree line 200 yards distant. Even ptarmigan leave marks in snow this fresh. But here, nothing walks away from this place. Vickers felt something cold settle in his chest that had nothing to do with the weather. He'd served in Cambodia during missions that officially never happened, seen things that never made it into reports. He'd learned to trust his instincts about when situations violated the natural order. This was one of those times. "Your dogs won't enter the communications building," he said, making it a statement rather than a question. Joseph nodded slowly. "Old spirits here. My grandfather spoke of this valley. Said it was a threshold place, where things pass between worlds." He met Vickers' eyes. "Your army built on bad ground. That's not going to be in my report, no. But you will think of it in the dark." Joseph turned away, calling to his team in Athabaskan. They moved with him toward the tree line, still searching, but Vickers could see the reluctance in their movements. Inside the mess hall, Vickers found Sergeant First Class Michael Porter organizing personal effects. Each footlocker had been photographed in place, then carefully catalogued. 32 lives reduced to inventories of letters, photographs, cassette tapes, and toiletries. "Sir," Porter held up a typewriter ribbon. "This is from the letter PFC Moss was writing. The one still in the machine." Vickers took it, holding it up to the light. The ribbon showed the imprint of the recently struck keys, the words visible in reverse. "You won't believe what we saw in the northern sky tonight." "Moss's mother lives in Columbus, Ohio," Porter continued. "Divorced, works as a bank teller. Danny was her only child. She's already called command 3 times today asking for updates." "What are we telling families?" "Active search in progress, that's all." Vickers set down the ribbon. Around them, the mess hall held the frozen tableau of interrupted lives. A chess game, mid-play, pieces scattered but still on the board. Coffee mugs arranged on tables. The forensics team had tested them, found coffee still warm when the search party arrived yesterday. Impossible, but documented. He walked to the kitchen where Specialist James Coe had apparently been preparing a late snack. A jar of peanut butter stood open beside bread and a knife. Vickers touched the jar's rim. Room temperature now, but the team had photographed condensation on the glass yesterday, moisture that suggested recent handling. "Colonel," a voice from the doorway made him turn. Captain Lisa Chen, the forensics officer, stood with a clipboard and an expression that told Vickers she'd found something new. "You need to see the barracks, 2nd bunk, west side." They walked through the compound in silence. Soldiers moved between buildings, methodical and professional, but Vickers caught the glances they traded, the way conversations stopped when he approached. Fear was contagious, especially when nobody could explain what they were afraid of. The barracks smelled of canvas and boot leather, scents he'd known since basic training. Chen led him to a bunk marked with evidence tape. The footlocker beneath it stood open, already processed. "This was Staff Sergeant Vincent Reyes' bunk," Chen said. "Vietnam vet joined this unit 8 months ago after requesting remote assignment. His file says he lost his family in a house fire 2 years back, wife and daughter." "I know the file. What did you find?" Chen pointed to the bunk's thin mattress. "The blanket shows signs of being slept on more recently than the others. See how the wrinkles are different? Less settled. And here..." She indicated a small notebook on the footlocker's top shelf. "This was tucked under the mattress. Found it when we were documenting the sleeping area." Vickers pulled on latex gloves before taking the notebook. The cover was blank, military issue. Inside, pages of dense handwriting filled the first half, equations and diagrams he didn't understand crowding the margins. But scattered throughout were sentences in plain English. "The frequency doesn't just carry signal, it carries consciousness. Webb is getting suspicious. Need to run the test before he shuts it down. If we can tune human thought to the auroral wavelength, imagine the communications range. Imagine what else we might." Contact. Jesus Christ, Vickers breathed. He knew something was wrong. He was experimenting on them. There's more. Chen flipped to the last entry dated October 13th, the day before the disappearance. Read this. Tomorrow night. Aurora forecast shows optimal conditions. Webb ordered a systems check, but I can override from the comm room. If I'm right, we won't need radios anymore. We'll be the radios. And maybe we'll finally know if there's anyone else out there listening to all those signals we've been pumping into the sky for decades. If I'm wrong, I suppose this notebook will explain everything. But I don't think I'm wrong. I think we're about to make history. Vickers closed the notebook carefully. Outside, the Huey made another pass, its shadow sliding across the window. Has anyone checked Reyes's locker for his standard gear? Already done. His rifle is missing from the armory manifest. Everything else is accounted for. 31 rifles in the rack. 1 empty slot. So he walked away, maybe after causing whatever happened here. Vickers felt the anger building, a familiar military response to clear culpability. Better to have an enemy, even if that enemy was one of your own. Better than the alternative. But Chen wasn't finished. The problem with that theory is the blood. They walked back outside, around the communications building to where evidence markers stood in the snow. The blood trail started behind the building's rear wall, 6 distinct drops leading toward the tree line before stopping abruptly. Type O negative, Chen said. Matches Reyes' blood type according to his medical records, but look at the pattern. Vickers crouched, studying the drops. They fell in a straight line, evenly spaced, suggesting someone walking steadily rather than running or stumbling. But after the 6th drop, nothing. The snow beyond stretched unmarked and pristine. No drag marks, Chen continued. No signs of a body being carried. No animal tracks that might have disturbed evidence. The blood just ends. And with this much snowfall during the storm, he would have had to walk on top of it somehow. Or fly. Joseph appeared beside them, silent as always. He knelt, examining the blood without touching it. This is wrong pattern. Blood this fresh, this cold, should freeze to snow, bond with ice crystals. But look. He gestured with one weathered hand. Sits on surface like was placed after snow stopped falling, maybe hours after. That's impossible, Vickers said. The storm ended around 0300 hours. We arrived at 1200. You're saying this blood is less than 9 hours old? I'm saying blood is strange. Everything here is strange. Joseph stood. You want answers, Colonel? I tell you true answer, this place should be left alone. Whatever happened, it was not meant for human eyes. The old stories they warn about threshold places, about opening doors that should stay closed. Vickers watched the elder walk away, heading back toward his team at the tree line. 24 hours ago, he would have dismissed such talk as superstition. Now, standing in fresh snow, marked only by impossible blood drops, he wasn't sure what he believed. The radio in his jacket crackled. Colonel Vickers, this is Search Team 3. We've completed the grid pattern northeast quadrant. No contacts, no tracks, no heat signatures. Request instructions. Expand the search radius to 5 miles. Focus on natural shelters, caves, overhangs, anywhere a person might hole up. Yes, sir. Team 3 out. Vickers looked at the communications building, its door standing open to reveal the dark interior. The forensics team had processed it thoroughly, but something made him want to see it again. He grabbed a flashlight from his pack and went inside. The comm room was small, built for efficiency. 2 desks faced each other, each with its own radio setup. The main transmitter stood against the far wall, a complex array of equipment that looked standard issue at first glance. But when Vickers examined it closely with the flashlight, he saw modifications. Unauthorized additions wired into the primary system. Whoever installed them knew what they were doing, but this wasn't military-approved equipment. The tape recorder sat on the left desk, its reel still holding the backup tape of the final transmission. Forensics had made copies, but Vickers pulled the original, holding it up to the light. Even without magnification, he could see the damage, The magnetic particles scrambled in a specific section, as if someone had taken a powerful magnet and deliberately dragged it across the tape. Not storm damage, not equipment failure. Someone erased this recording manually. He sat at the desk trying to imagine that night. The storm circling overhead, unnatural and purposeful. Webb at this console, keying the transmitter for his final message. Command, we have a situation. The storm it's not moving like weather. It's circling the base. The men are seeing. And then silence. Not static, not a gradual fade. Just silence. The search operation expanded like a slow contagion across the Tanana Valley floor. By late October, more than 200 personnel had cycled through forward operating base Kraken, their boots churning the virgin snow into frozen mud. Helicopters rattled overhead in grid patterns so precise they could have been mapping the stars. Ground teams moved outward in concentric circles, metal detectors sweeping for dog tags, rifles, any fragment of 32 vanished men. Colonel Raymond Vickers coordinated from a heated command tent erected 300 yards from the main base. The canvas walls rippled against Arctic wind, while inside, topographic maps sprawled across folding tables beneath the glare of halogen lamps. Red pins marked search sectors already cleared. Blue pins indicated possible sightings. All false alarms. White pins tracked the expanding perimeter. The pins covered 500 square miles now. No red had turned to gold. Captain Lisa Chen stood at Vickers' shoulder, reviewing the morning's satellite imagery. Her breath misted in the inadequate warmth. Thermal scans are clean, sir. If anyone's out there, they're not generating body heat. Or they're somewhere the satellites can't see. Vickers dragged a finger across the map, tracing the elevation lines northeast toward the Brooks Range. Underground. Cave systems. The geology surveys don't show significant cave formations in this sector. The geology surveys are 40 years old, but his voice carried no conviction. 6 weeks of searching had taught him the difference between possibility and probability. The valley had swallowed 2nd Platoon without leaving a trace. No scent for the dogs, no heat signature for the infrared, no disturbance in the landscape beyond that single blood trail to nowhere. A radio operator looked up from his station. Colonel, Search Team Delta reports contact. Vickers crossed to the communications desk in 3 strides. What kind of contact? Fabric, sir. Military issue parka fragment caught on spruce branches. Grid sector November 7. November 7 put them 12 miles southwest of Kraken. The first solid find in 3 days. Chen was already pulling weather data. Wind patterns during the storm could have carried loose gear that distance, especially if it was caught in the updraft from the Aurora event. Get a team to that location. Vickers kept his tone flat, professional. Hope was a luxury he'd learned to ration. Full documentation, photographs before anyone touches it. The tent fell into focused silence, broken only by radio chatter and the scratch of pencils on clipboards. Outside, the whump of rotor blades announced another helicopter returning for refuel, its thermal cameras having found nothing but caribou and the scattered heat signatures of search personnel. Vickers had stopped counting sorties after the first week. The fuel costs alone would trigger a budgetary review in Fairbanks, but none of that mattered if they found Lieutenant Webb and his men alive. By late morning, the fabric sample arrived in a sealed evidence bag. First Lieutenant Sarah Kowalski from the forensics detachment examined it under portable floodlights, her movements methodical. Vickers watched her tweezers lift the torn material, turn it under magnification. It's ours, she confirmed. M65 field jacket, woodland camouflage, recent issue. She indicated the manufacturer's stamp barely visible on the seam. Contract dated 1986. Matches what 2nd Platoon would have been wearing. Blood? Negative. Just weathering and the tear where it caught the branch. Kowalski looked up, her eyes tired behind safety glasses. It's something, but it doesn't tell us much. Could have blown off a soldier. Could have been discarded during movement. Without the rest of the jacket or a body, we're guessing. Vickers accepted the assessment with a nod. In Cambodia, fragments had been enough. A scrap of uniform leading to a downed pilot, a boot print pointing toward an evac route. But Cambodia had been jungle warfare with knowable parameters. This valley followed different rules. He returned to the base itself that afternoon, needing to see the scene again with fresh eyes. The interior remained exactly as his team had first found it, preserved now under guard, photographed from every angle, but still radiating that uncanny sense of interrupted routine. Vickers walked the mess hall where cooling coffee had become a forensic detail. He studied the poker hands left on the table, cards arranged in patterns suggesting 2nd Platoon had been mid-game when something drew them away. Except nothing drew them anywhere. The snow proved that. In the communications building, Staff Sergeant Porter had compiled a detailed inventory. Vickers reviewed it in the radio room where the mystery had deepened rather than clarified. The equipment modifications Reyes had made were sophisticated, bypassing standard protocols, rigging unauthorized transmitters into the existing array. Porter, who'd served 2 tours as a signals specialist, had needed 3 days to map the alterations. "He knew exactly what he was doing, sir." Porter indicated a junction box where civilian components had been spliced into military-grade wiring. "This isn't field improvisation. This is engineering. And look at the calibration settings on these frequency modulators." Vickers examined the handwritten notations on pieces of tape affixed to various dials. The numbers meant nothing to him, but Porter's expression suggested significance. "These frequencies fall outside our standard communications bands, way outside. He was broadcasting into ranges we don't use. Hell, that the FCC doesn't even allocate. What was he trying to reach? Or what was trying to reach him?" The words came out before Vickers could stop them. He cleared his throat. "Any progress recovering the erased transmission?" "Audio techs say the magnetic scrambling was too thorough. Whatever Reyes didn't want us to hear, we're not hearing it." Porter's jaw tightened. "But they did extract one thing. The silence after the cutoff, it's not dead air. There's a carrier signal underneath, extremely faint, like the microphone was still open somewhere, picking up ambient sound." "Ambient sound from where?" "That's what's strange. They ran it through enhancement filters. It's not wind, not static. It's almost like—" Porter hesitated, choosing words carefully. "Like breathing. Multiple people breathing in sync." The words settled over Vickers like snow accumulation. Steady, cold, suffocating. He'd heard combat recordings before, the chaos of firefights captured on patrol tapes. This was something else. 32 men breathing as one. Or 31, if Reyes had already fled. Evening brought the family's calls. Vickers took them in the operations tent, updating next of kin with fragments of information that added up to nothing. Yes, they'd found evidence of 2nd Platoon's presence. No, they hadn't located the soldiers themselves. Yes, search efforts continued around the clock. No, he couldn't provide a timeline for resolution. Danny Moss's mother, calling from a Dayton suburb, asked questions that cut deeper than tactical debriefs. "Do you think they suffered?" Her voice fragile across the satellite connection. "When whatever happened, do you think it was fast?" Vickers thought of the card game interrupted mid-hand. The letter frozen mid-sentence. "I think it was very fast, ma'am. They wouldn't have known." He had no evidence for that comfort. But the lie felt necessary. Humane. After the calls, he walked the perimeter fence as darkness settled over the compound. The aurora had returned, pale green curtains shimmering above the valley, beautiful and indifferent. Somewhere in this wilderness, Staff Sergeant Vincent Reyes was either dead or hiding. The blood trail suggested injury, enough to leave a visible track before it inexplicably ended. Could a man survive out here with a wound, without gear, through Arctic nights? The Athabascan trackers thought not. Joseph had been diplomatic but firm. The forest claimed the unprepared within days. But Joseph had also spoken of threshold places, old spirits, doorways the living shouldn't approach. Vickers filed such notions under cultural context, not investigative leads. Yet, standing beneath that aurora, He felt the weight of unknowing press against his certainty. By early December, the search had consumed $2.3 million in military resources. Fairbanks' command began the delicate dance of operational wind-down. Vickers received the directive during a morning briefing: maintain minimal presence, transition to recovery mode, prepare final disposition recommendations. The words were bureaucratic antiseptic for hard truth. They were giving up the search for living men. He convened his senior staff in the command tent on December 8th. Frost had invaded despite the heaters, ice crystals forming in the canvas corners. Outside, temperatures had dropped to 18 below. Another month, and the valley would be impassable. "We've covered 500 square miles with overlapping search patterns." Vickers indicated the map, now drowning in colored pins. "Thermal imaging, ground teams, tracker dogs, satellite surveillance. We've found one parka fragment and a blood trail that leads nowhere. The facts suggest 2nd Platoon did not leave this valley by conventional means." Captain Chen spoke carefully. "Are we saying they didn't leave at all?" "I'm saying our search has been thorough to the point of redundancy. If they're out there, they've moved beyond our operational range, or—" He didn't finish. The alternative hung unspoken. "What about Reyes?" This from Lieutenant Kowalski. "The blood trail, the missing rifle, the evidence he tampered with communications. He's either a witness or a perpetrator." "Agreed. I'm adding him to the deserter watch list, but the reality is he's as gone as the others." Vickers straightened. "Final recommendation. Casualties due to environmental conditions, bodies unrecovered. We cannot prove what happened, but we can document what didn't. No evidence of enemy action, no evidence of mass desertion, no evidence of foul play beyond Reyes' unauthorized experiments." The words felt like stones in his mouth. They filed the report on December 14th, exactly 2 months after the vanishing. Vickers signed it in his quarters at Fort Wainwright, his hand steady despite the doubt corroding his certainty. The families would receive official notification within 48 hours. FOB Kraken would be decommissioned pending budget review. Files would be sealed under national security classification, not because they contained secrets, but because they contained questions no one could answer. The last step was his personal journal entry, made in longhand with the door locked. "We searched 500 square miles and found ghosts. Not bodies. The wind carries ash from the Mentasta Mountains as Trevor Calloway pushes through chest-high alder along what his GPS insists is an access road. August in the Tanana Valley means green so thick it swallows the past. Black spruce crowding tight, fireweed tall as his shoulders, mosquitoes forming clouds around his Yankees cap. He's 19 and 3,000 miles from home, here because soil contamination studies pay better than waiting tables, and UC Berkeley doesn't care how you fund your thesis as long as you deliver data. The road shouldn't exist. Modern satellite imagery shows unbroken forest where his grandfather's survey map, dated 1986, purchased at an estate sale in Fairbanks for $12, indicates a military access route. Trevor follows it anyway because the old maps have been right about 3 abandoned mining camps already, yielding soil samples heavy with mercury and arsenic. Good data. Publishable findings. What he finds instead is a fence. Chain link, 8 feet tall, overgrown with creeping vines but still standing. Rust has eaten holes through the metal in places. A faded sign dangles from one post. Restricted area. U.S. Army. Authorized personnel only. The lettering has been bleached almost white by 17 summers. Trevor stands there in the afternoon heat, disposable camera hanging from his neck, weighing curiosity against trespassing. The fence is a suggestion now, not a barrier. Sections have collapsed entirely where birch trees pushed through. Beyond it, he can make out the geometric shapes of buildings, their roof lines sagging, walls leaning. His phone has no signal. It hasn't for the last 6 miles. He climbs through a gap in the fence. The compound spreads before him in pieces. What must have been a parade ground is now a meadow of wild grass and purple lupin. Buildings squat in various states of surrender to the forest. Tar paper shingles scattered across the ground. Window frames empty of glass. Doors hanging open like mouths. The metal of a water tower glints through the trees, its legs buckled. Trevor moves through the ghost town with his camera clicking. The light is perfect. Late afternoon gold slanting through the spruce, making everything look both beautiful and melancholy. He photographs a basketball hoop whose net has rotted away, a flagpole bent at 45 degrees, the rusted shell of what might have been a generator. Near what he guesses was the administration building, he finds a plaque half buried in moss. Forward Operating Base Kraken. 3rd Battalion, 7th Infantry Division, 1984. Nothing about when it closed. Nothing about why. The mess hall has collapsed entirely, its roof caved in by snow loads from winters past. But the barracks still stand, and Trevor pushes through the buckled door of the nearest one. Inside, bunks line the walls in iron frames, their mattresses long since consumed by rodents and weather. Footlockers sit at the foot of each bed, padlocks rusted through. One hangs open, revealing rotted fabric that might once have been uniforms. He photographs everything, his thesis already evolving. This is better than contaminated soil. This is historical documentation of military decay, abandonment in the wilderness, the impermanence of human presence in Alaska's interior. In the 3rd barracks, he finds a calendar still tacked to the wall, curled and brown but readable. October 1987. Trevor stares at it for a long moment. 17 years ago, he was 2 years old. The calendar is turned to October, someone's last month here. Several dates in the first 2 weeks have been marked with X's in fading blue pen, and then nothing. The 14th is circled, but no notation explains why. The find makes his skin prickle. He shoots 3 pictures of the calendar from different angles. Outside, the sun is lower now, the shadows stretching long between the buildings. Trevor checks his watch. 4:47 p.m. He should start back soon. The hike out will take 3 hours, and he doesn't want to navigate that overgrown road in the dark. But there's one more building he hasn't explored. It sits apart from the others, closer to the tree line, a low structure with a concrete foundation and what looks like reinforced walls. The door is steel, dented but intact, hanging half open. A faded sign above the entrance reads, Communications. Trevor hesitates at the threshold. Something about the building feels different, heavier, maybe, or just more deliberately abandoned. Through the gap in the door, he can see the interior is dark. He pulls a flashlight from his pack and pushes inside. The front room is a disaster of overturned chairs and filing cabinets with drawers gaping open, papers scattered across the floor and disintegrated into pulp. Water damage has stained the walls in long brown streaks. The air smells like rot and animal musk. Something skitters away from his light, probably a squirrel or pine marten. A doorway at the back of the room leads to stairs descending. Trevor knows he should turn around. His thesis advisor's voice echoes in his head. Don't take unnecessary risks in remote locations. But his flashlight beam has already found something interesting at the bottom of the stairs. The gleam of metal equipment, still intact. The stairs creak under his weight but hold. The basement is surprisingly dry, its concrete walls keeping the worst of the weather out. His flashlight sweeps across a room full of old radio equipment, receivers and transmitters mounted on racks, cables running between them, everything covered in a fine layer of dust and cobwebs. A desk sits in the center, an office chair pulled up to it. In the chair is a skeleton. Trevor's flashlight beam locks on it, his breath stopping in his chest. The bones are still clothed in rotted fatigues, dark green fabric hanging in strips from the frame. The skull has tipped forward, resting against the radio equipment on the desk as if the person fell asleep there. Dog tags hang from the vertebrae, glinting in the light. His camera slips from his hands, clattering against the concrete floor. The sound breaks the paralysis. Trevor backs toward the stairs, his flashlight swinging wild, and that's when he sees the others. Not in the radio room. In the attached rooms, visible through doorways his initial sweep missed. Another skeleton slumped against the wall in what looks like a storage closet. Two more in a side room, one collapsed on a cot, the other on the floor beside it. Trevor runs. Up the stairs, through the front room, out into the fading sunlight that suddenly seems impossibly bright and clean. He keeps running past the barracks, past the collapsed mess hall, through the lupine meadow that was once a parade ground. The fence catches his sleeve as he scrambles through, tearing the fabric. He doesn't stop until he's 100 yards down the trail, gasping for air, his hands shaking as he fumbles for the satellite phone buried at the bottom of his pack. The phone takes forever to acquire a signal. Trevor keeps glancing back toward the compound, half expecting something to follow him through the trees. But there's only wilderness, the same green wall he's been navigating for days. When the signal finally connects, he dials the ranger station and talk. Alaska State Parks, this is Ranger Michaels. Trevor's voice comes out higher than intended. There's a bodies, at an old military base off the Glen Highway, maybe 20 miles from... Slow down, Michaels interrupts. You found human remains? Yes, multiple. I don't know how many. There's a whole compound, it's fenced, it says Fort Kraken on a sign. FOB Kraken? The ranger's tone shifts. You're out near the old FOB Kraken site? I don't know the name. There are buildings, all abandoned. And I went into the communications building and there's a skeleton in the basement, sitting at a desk, and I saw at least 3 more. Okay, I need you to mark your GPS position and get clear of the area. Do not touch anything else. How far are you from the site now? Trevor checks his GPS with trembling hands. 1/4 mile, maybe. Keep moving. I'm dispatching units now. What's your name? Trevor Calloway. I'm a student. I was just doing soil surveys. I found the place by accident. You're not in trouble, Mr. Calloway. Just stay on the line and keep walking until you reach the highway. Behind him, the sun sets over the Tanana Valley, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The same sky that 17 years ago had filled with an aurora that didn't move like weather, that circled a base full of living soldiers until they weren't living anymore. Trevor walks fast, the ranger's voice a steady presence in his ear, asking questions he barely hears. He's thinking about the skeleton in the basement, the way it was positioned at the radio desk like someone on duty, the dog tags he didn't get close enough to read. The calendar in the barracks marked to October 14th. The way the whole compound felt preserved, like something had stopped time mid-stride and then simply walked away. By the time he reaches the highway 3 hours later, the first police vehicles are already rolling up, their lights cutting through the gathering dark. Trevor gives his statement to a state trooper, hands over his GPS coordinates, surrenders his camera. They wrap a blanket around his shoulders even though the evening is warm. How many did you see? The trooper asks. 4 for sure, but I didn't search the whole place. I just ran. The trooper exchanges a look with his partner. And you said it was marked as FOB Kraken? That's what the plaque said. More vehicles arrive, unmarked SUVs that disgorge people in civilian clothes who speak in low tones with the troopers. Someone mentions the FBI. Someone else says something about a cold case from the 80s. Trevor sits in the back of an ambulance while a paramedic checks his vitals, watching the controlled chaos of an investigation spinning up. Radio chatter crackles between vehicles. A helicopter passes overhead, its searchlight sweeping the forest. Was this place classified or something? Trevor asks the paramedic. The man shrugs. Before my time, but I heard stories when I was stationed at Fort Wainwright. Whole platoon went missing. The forensics team arrives as the sun breaks the eastern horizon, painting the Tanana Valley in shades of amber and blood. Claire Tanaka steps from the FBI helicopter before the skids fully settle, her breath misting in the October morning air. She's 48 hours removed from a domestic terrorism briefing in Seattle, pulled to this assignment because of 3 words in the initial report. FOB Kraken, Alaska. Her brother almost served here. David Tanaka, class of '86, turned down the Kraken posting at the last minute for a communications slot in Germany. 20 years later, he sends her articles about the vanished Platoon every October 14th, as if the anniversary might finally yield answers. Now she stands at the edge of those answers, watching white-suited technicians crawl through the ruins. Agent Tanaka? A young state trooper approaches, clipboard clutched like a shield. We've established a perimeter at 200 yards. Media helicopters keep trying to get closer. Keep them back. She scans the compound. Black spruce has torn through the barracks. The mess hall roof collapsed years ago, but the communications building, half sunken into permafrost, still stands. Where's the student who found them? Gave his statement last night, flying back to California this afternoon. The trooper consults his notes. Trevor Calloway. Said he was doing environmental surveys, stumbled on the access road by accident. Accident. Tanaka doesn't believe in them, not in her work. She crosses the compound toward a cluster of technicians outside the communications building. Yellow evidence markers dot the ground like strange flowers. Dr. Martin Reese, the medical examiner from Fairbanks, kneels beside a tarp-covered shape, his silver hair catching the morning light. What have we got, Martin? He looks up, eyes red-rimmed from the early call. 31 sets of remains, all positioned exactly as described in the 1987 incident reports. He pulls back the tarp, revealing a skeleton still seated at a rusted typewriter, finger bones resting on keys. This one appears to be PFC Daniel Moss. Dog tags match the casualty list. Tanaka crouches beside him. The skeleton wears the remnants of fatigues, green fabric rotted to dark threads. A coffee mug rests at the desk's edge, collapsed into rust. But the typewriter holds a sheet of paper, miraculously preserved in the dry basement air. Mom, you won't believe what we saw in the northern sky tonight. The sentence ends there. 17 years of silence filling the space after that dash. Cause of death? That's where it gets strange. Reese gestures to the skull. No trauma, no defensive wounds, but look at this. He points to subtle discoloration along the bone, patches of gray-green like tarnish on copper. All 31 skeletons show the same pattern. I've never seen bone degradation like this. A young forensic tech approaches, her tablet glowing. Dr. Reese, initial spectrometry results are back from the samples. He takes the tablet, scrolling through data. His expression shifts from professional interest to something approaching alarm. That can't be right. What? Tanaka leans in. There's a chemical compound in the bone marrow, traces of it throughout the skeletal structure. He looks at her. It's similar to an experimental psychoactive agent, but the molecular structure is off, like someone tried to synthesize it with limited equipment. Similar to what agent? One DARPA didn't develop until 2003. The words hang between them like smoke. Tanaka feels the case shifting beneath her feet, solid ground becoming quicksand. Run those tests again. I want 3 independent labs confirming this. Already ordered. Reese stands, brushing dirt from his knees. Agent Tanaka, I've worked 40 years in forensics. I've seen bodies preserved in ice, mummified in deserts, dissolved in acid. But this... He gestures at the communications building. These men didn't die from violence. They didn't freeze or starve. It's like their bodies just stopped, all at once. 31 soldiers ceasing to exist in perfect simultaneity. Show me the rest. They descend into the basement where Trevor Calloway made his discovery. Battery-powered work lights illuminate the space, casting harsh shadows. The air smells of earth and decay and something else, a metallic tang that makes Tanaka's fillings ache. The skeletons are positioned ad inch throughout the building exactly as described in Colonel Vickers' original report. 4 soldiers at a card table, hands where playing cards once rested. One in a shower stall, head tilted back under a corroded pipe. Another at a desk, pen beside empty fingers, a logbook open to October 14th. But the radio room holds the centerpiece of this tableau. The equipment is still there, surprisingly intact beneath layers of rust. Vacuum tubes like sleeping eyes. Dials frozen at specific frequencies. And at the central console, a skeleton slumped over the controls, one hand reaching toward the microphone. The dog tags read, SGKT Vincent Reyes. Except the technician standing beside the desk shakes his head. Those tags were planted. We found them in the skeleton's hand, not around the neck. Tanaka's pulse quickens. Planted? Someone wanted us to think this was Reyes. The tech holds up an evidence bag containing the tags. But the skeleton shows different markers. Dental records match PFC James Coe. Reyes isn't here. The missing body. Tanaka feels pieces clicking together, fragments of a puzzle assembling in her mind. She approaches the radio console, careful not to disturb the remains. The equipment has been modified, unauthorized additions jury-rigged into the standard military setup. Wires snake between components that shouldn't connect. A homemade transmitter sits beneath the main panel, its purpose unclear. "Can you get this operational?" she asks the tech. "Maybe the tape player?" He examines a reel-to-reel recorder, its magnetic wheels brown with age. "But I don't know what we'd find. According to the 87 reports, the final transmission was erased. Try anyway." While the tech works, Tanaka climbs back to ground level, pulling out her satellite phone. The signal is weak this deep in the valley, but after 3 attempts she reaches the Anchorage field office. "I need everything on Staff Sergeant. Vincent Reyes. Military records, psychological evaluations, known associates. And get me the original investigator." She checks her notes. "Colonel Raymond Vickers. If he's still alive, I want to talk to him." The response crackles through static. "Vickers retired in 1990, living in Billings, Montana. We can have someone contact him." "No, I'll do it myself." She watches technicians photographing evidence, cataloging bones, trying to make sense of the senseless. "And pull any classified files on Project Northgard. I don't care what clearance level you need. Agent Tanaka, that project is 31 dead soldiers, Johnson. The security classification died with them." She ends the call as Dr. Reese emerges from the basement, his face gray in the morning light. "Claire, you need to see this." They walk to a mobile forensics lab set up in an old supply tent. Reese spreads photos across a folding table, close-ups of bone samples under microscopic magnification. The discoloration she noticed earlier appears as crystalline structures growing through the calcium matrix like frost patterns on winter glass. "This isn't degradation," Reese says quietly. "It's transformation." Something altered the molecular structure of their bones at the cellular level. "Radiation?" "We checked. Background radiation is normal. This is something else." He pulls up another image, this one showing the chemical compound in fluorescent green. "Whatever this substance is, it bonded with their skeletal structure. I've sent samples to a biochemist at Stanford who specializes in exotic toxins. She's never seen anything like it." Tanaka's phone vibrates. A text from the tech in the basement. "Found something on the tape." She runs. The radio room glows with work lights. The tech has the reel-to-reel connected to modern equipment, cables snaking to a laptop. "The tape was erased," he explains. "But we have new forensic audio technology. We can sometimes recover magnetic patterns even after deliberate destruction." He hits play. Static fills the space, harsh and white, but beneath it, faint as ghosts, voices emerge. Not words, something deeper, a harmonic resonance that bypasses the ears and settles directly into the chest cavity. 31 distinct frequencies braiding together into a single sustained note. Breathing, all of them breathing in perfect unison. The sound cuts off at exactly 3 minutes, 14 seconds. The tech's hands shake as he stops the playback. "That's impossible. The transmission was sent October 14, 1987, at 1253 hours. But this breathing, it was recorded over the erasure, meaning it happened after someone wiped the original message." "How long after?" "No way to tell. Could be minutes. Could be days." Tanaka stares at the ancient radio equipment, at the skeleton of James Coe still reaching for the microphone. Someone survived the initial event. Someone stayed behind, breathing into the static, erasing evidence, arranging bodies. Vincent Reyes. And now, 17 years later, he's still out there. The only one who knows what really happened in this room when 31 soldiers stopped being human and became something else. She climbs back into daylight as media helicopters thunder overhead, their cameras trained on the ruins where ghosts have become evidence. Her phone rings. The Anchorage office with preliminary background on Reyes. But before she can answer, a state trooper runs toward her, radio in hand, his face pale. "Agent Tanaka, you need to hear this." She takes the radio. The dispatcher's voice crackles through. "Be advised, subject just walked into Anchorage FBI field office. White male, approximately 50 years old, missing fingers on left hand. Identified himself as Vincent Reyes. Says he's ready to talk." The trooper stares at her. The man who walked into the Anchorage FBI field office at 12:17 on August 19, 2004, looked like he'd been carved from the Alaskan wilderness itself. His face bore the deep creases of prolonged exposure to elements that didn't forgive weakness. The fluorescent lights overhead revealed what natural light would have softened. A roadmap of frostbite scars across his cheeks, the waxy texture of skin that had frozen and thawed too many times. His left hand rested on the intake desk with 2 fingers missing at the second knuckle, old wounds long healed into smooth stumps. "I need to speak with whoever's investigating the bodies at FOB Kraken," he said. His voice carried the flatness of someone who'd spent years with only wind for conversation. The duty agent, a young woman named Patterson, fresh from Quantico, glanced up from her computer screen. "Sir, that's an ongoing federal investigation. If you have information, I can take a statement." "My name is Vincent Reyes." He set his driver's license on the counter with his damaged hand. "Staff Sergeant, U.S. Army, retired. Serial number 447-62-8831. I was stationed at FOB Kraken in October 1987. Patterson's fingers froze over her keyboard. She'd been briefed on the case 3 days ago when the field office went into overdrive. 31 bodies. 1 missing. "Don't move." Her hand dropped to her sidearm as she reached for the phone. Within 8 minutes, the lobby filled with agents. Reyes didn't resist when they patted him down, finding nothing but a worn wallet, truck keys, and a small notebook with water-damaged pages. They escorted him through security doors into the building's interior, past cubicles where work stopped and heads turned. Special Agent Claire Tanaka met them in the corridor outside Interview Room 3. She was smaller than Reyes expected, mid-30s with sharp eyes that cataloged everything. His military posture despite the weathering, the way his right hand trembled slightly, the fact that he met her gaze directly without the defiance or submission that usually marked guilty men. "Mr. Reyes," she didn't extend her hand. "I'm Special Agent Tanaka, FBI. Ma'am, you understand you're not under arrest. You can leave at any time." "I'm not going anywhere." He glanced at the interview room door. "I've been running for 17 years. I'm done." The room was standard issue. Gray walls, bolted table, chairs designed for discomfort during long questioning. A camera in the corner blinked red. Tanaka sat across from him while 2 other agents flanked the door. She placed a digital recorder on the table between them. "This interview is being recorded. Today is August 19th, 2004, 12:31 p.m. Present are Special Agent Claire Tanaka, Special Agent Robert Chen, Special Agent Michael Dvorak, and," she looked at Reyes. "State your name for the record." "Vincent Michael Reyes, Staff Sergeant, United States Army." "Mr. Reyes, 3 days ago, a civilian discovered remains at what used to be Forward Operating Base Kraken. Preliminary identification suggests that 31 of the 32 soldiers reported missing in October 1987. You were the 32nd. "Yes, ma'am." "Where have you been for the last 17 years?" "In the bush, mostly within a 100-mile radius of Kraken. I had a shelter about 40 miles northeast near the Salcha River. Moved around depending on season." Tanaka opened a folder, sliding a photograph across the table. It showed one of the skeletons, still positioned at the radio desk, dog tags visible. "Do you know this man?" Reyes studied the image. His jaw tightened. "PFC, James Coe, good kid. Wanted to be a translator. His Korean wasn't good enough for the Army's standards, so they stuck him at a radio desk in Alaska. He looked up. "That's my desk. Those are my dog tags in his hand." "Why would your tags be with his body?" "Because I put them there." Reyes's voice dropped. "Before I left, I thought if anyone found them, they'd think I was dead too, that it would be over." "What would be over, Mr. Reyes?" He was silent for 30 seconds. The camera kept recording. Agent Chen shifted his weight by the door. "The guilt," Reyes finally said. "The knowledge of what I'd done. But it doesn't work that way. You can't bury it with dog tags." Tanaka leaned forward slightly. "What did you do, Mr. Reyes?" "I opened a doorway." His eyes fixed on something past her shoulder, past the wall, into distances only he could see. Project Northgard. That's what they called it. Official designation was atmospheric research, over-the-horizon communications using auroral electromagnetic properties. But that wasn't the real purpose. What was the real purpose? Consciousness translation. The words came out careful, practiced, like he'd rehearsed this confession in his wilderness shelter for years. Using specific frequencies aligned with auroral activity to shift human awareness, expand it. The theory was that if we could tune soldiers' minds to quantum entanglement states, we could create instantaneous communication across any distance. Telepathy, basically, not science fiction, actual quantum mechanics applied to neural tissue. Tanaka's expression didn't change, but she made a note. "And you were part of this project?" "I was the primary technical operator. I'd worked signals intelligence in Vietnam. Radio was my specialty. But this—" He shook his head. "This was something else. Equipment that shouldn't have existed in 1987. Frequency generators that could target specific brainwave patterns. I didn't design it. DARPA scientists did that, but I maintained it. Ran the tests." "Tests on who?" "On us. The whole platoon. We didn't know at first. They told us it was communication drills, enhanced radio protocols. But I figured it out after about 6 months. The shared dreams. The way we'd finish each other's sentences. How the dogs wouldn't come near the comm building after we ran the equipment." Agent Chen spoke from the door. "You're claiming the U.S. Army conducted unauthorized experiments on American soldiers?" Reyes turned to look at him. "I'm claiming I did. With authorization that went through channels most soldiers never see. Lieutenant Webb suspected. He started keeping a private log, asked questions that made the oversight officers nervous. But by then, it was too late. We'd already made contact." "Contact with what?" Tanaka asked. "With something on the other side." Reyes's damaged hand curled into a fist on the table. "The frequency realm. That's what I called it. A dimension of pure consciousness, existing parallel to ours. When we tuned the equipment to specific auroral patterns, we could touch it, feel it pressing back. It wasn't empty space, Agent Tanaka. There was something there, something vast and patient and very, very curious about us." The room was silent except for the hum of the recorder. "On October 14th, 1987, Reyes continued, I activated the full system against Lieutenant Webb's direct orders. There was an electromagnetic storm building. Once in 3 centuries, the meteorologist said later. But I knew it wasn't natural. It was a response. We'd been knocking on the door for months, and something finally decided to knock back." "What happened to the platoon, Mr. Reyes?" "They were translated, pulled out of their bodies and into the frequency realm. All 31 of them. Their consciousness just left. One moment they were men. The next they were empty shells, bodies standing there with no one inside. I watched it happen. Watched them dissolve into light and static while their hearts kept beating." Tanaka glanced at Agent Chen, then back to Reyes. "Why weren't you affected?" "Because I shut it down." His voice cracked. "At the last second. I killed the power, closed the doorway. I was at the controls when it happened, protected by the equipment's shielding, and I could have reversed it immediately. There was a window, maybe 30 seconds, where I could have pulled them back, but I froze. I just stood there. By the time I hit the emergency shutdown, Their bodies had been without consciousness for almost a minute, long enough for the neurological damage to become irreversible. You're saying their brains died while their hearts kept beating. For about 6 more hours. That's how long it took for the autonomic systems to fail without conscious control. I watched them die, one by one. James Coe at my desk, Danny Moss in the barracks, Lieutenant Webb in the mess hall. All of them positioned exactly where they'd been standing when the translation happened, and I recorded every second of it. Tanaka's pen paused over her notepad. You recorded their deaths? I recorded the data, frequency readings, neurological signatures, atmospheric conditions, because even though I'd just killed my entire platoon, part of me still thought like a scientist, still wanted to understand what we'd touched. He looked down at his ruined hand. That's the worst part. Not that I let them die, that I used their deaths to gather information. What did you do with this data? Kept it. In notebooks. Some of it's in the shelter you'll find near the Salcha River. The coordinates are in my truck's GPS. The rest, he tapped his temple, up here. Equations and observations I've been working on for 17 years, trying to understand how to reverse what I did. Can it be reversed? Theoretically, yes, if there were bodies to return to. His laugh was bitter. But there aren't any more, are there? They've been dead for 17 years. No bodies means no way home for whatever part of them is still out there in the frequency realm. Tanaka was quiet for a moment, studying him. Outside the interview room, phones were ringing. Agents were pulling files. The discovery at FOB Kraken had already attracted national media attention, and now the missing man had walked in with a story that sounded like science fiction. Mr. Reyes, do you understand how this sounds? Like the confession of a madman. He met her eyes. I know. The psychologist sets her notepad on the metal table. Through the one-way glass, Vincent Reyes sits hunched in the holding cell, fingers drumming patterns against his knee. Rhythmic, precise, the same 7-beat sequence repeating. Dr. Sarah Chen has evaluated hundreds of PTSD cases. This doesn't fit the profile. His baseline assessment from 1986 shows exceptional stability, she says, reviewing the manila folder. 98th percentile for emotional resilience. Scored highest in his unit for stress management. She taps a highlighted section. This man was recommended for officer training. Tanaka watches Reyes through the glass. He's sketching on the paper they provided, his frostbitten hand moving in quick, confident strokes. Not the hesitant marks of someone grasping at fragments. These are technical diagrams, precise as blueprints. And now? Tanaka asks. Dr. Chen pulls out the new evaluation. Severe PTSD, dissociative episodes, possible schizophrenic, features. But here's what troubles me. His delusions are too consistent. Most trauma-induced psychosis shows deterioration over time, contradictions building. Reyes's story hasn't changed. Every detail locks together. Tanaka leans closer to the glass. Reyes has moved from sketching to writing equations in tiny, cramped text. The numbers march across the page like soldiers in formation. Could 17 years alone do this? Isolation syndrome, absolutely. But the knowledge he's displaying... Dr. Chen shakes her head. He's describing equipment modifications that match classified DARPA projects from the 1990s. Either he's had access to information that shouldn't exist, or... She trails off. Or what? Or something gave him that information. The cell door opens. Reyes looks up as Tanaka enters, carrying a thick folder. His eyes track her movement with an intensity that makes her skin prickle. Not hostility, expectation. You said you heard them, Tanaka begins, sitting across from him. The Platoon. For 17 years. Every October 14th, 2153 hours. Reyes's voice is steady. Same time, we opened the doorway. Opened it how? He pushes the diagrams across. Tanaka studies them. Circuit modifications, frequency calculations, antenna configurations that mean nothing to her but clearly meant everything to him. Project Northgard was exploring quantum entanglement, Reyes says. The idea that particles separated by distance remain connected. DARPA wanted to apply it to human consciousness. Soldiers thinking as one unit, communicating instantaneously across battlefields. His fingers trace the sketches. We didn't know we'd found something else. A realm where consciousness exists without bodies. Pure awareness, pure frequency. This all sounds insane, I know. Reyes meets her eyes. I've had 17 years to question my sanity, Agent Tanaka. Every day in that shelter, asking if I imagined it all, but the voices come back. Every year, and they're not in my head. Tanaka opens the folder, sliding out crime scene photos from his wilderness shelter. Forensic markers highlight a metal case beneath the floorboards. These chemical samples, the ones matching the compound in your platoon's bones. Something shifts in Reyes's expression, the door closing. Where did you get them? I synthesized them in 1987. Forensics says this compound requires equipment that didn't exist until 2001. Then forensics is wrong. His jaw tightens. I used what I had. The base chemistry lab. Lieutenant Webb's medical supplies. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Tanaka pulls out another photo. The notebook from his shelter, open to a page dense with equations. These calculations describe consciousness transfer mechanics. Our quantum physicists say they're theoretically sound but would take a team years to develop. I had 17 years. In a cabin with no electricity, no reference materials, I had the most important reference material in the world. Reyes leans forward. I had them. Every October 14th, they tell me more, describe what they're experiencing. The frequency realm isn't empty, Agent Tanaka. It's full of information. Every transmission humans have ever sent, every thought that ever resonated at the right wavelength. They learned things there, and they taught me. The room feels colder. Tanaka glances at the one-way glass, knowing Dr. Chen is recording every word. So the platoon taught you how to understand what you did to them? I didn't do anything to them. Reyes's frostbitten hand slams the table. I tried to save them. When the doorway opened, when the storm came, I was the only one who knew how to shut it down. But shutting it meant losing contact with something we'd been searching for since the project started. A realm of pure consciousness, direct mind-to-mind connection. Do you understand what that meant? You chose data over lives. I chose wrong. His voice cracks. I know that now. But in that moment, with 31 men already gone, their consciousness pulled through. I thought I could learn enough to bring them back. Just a few more hours. Just enough time to understand the process, to map it, to reverse it. How long did you wait? Silence. Reyes stares at his hands. How long, Sergeant? 72 hours. Barely a whisper. Their bodies could survive maybe 6 without permanent damage. I kept the doorway open for 72. Tanaka feels her stomach drop. Why? Because, by hour 6, they were still conscious, still aware, trapped in the frequency realm, but alive. I thought if I could stabilize the connection, build a bridge strong enough, I could pull them back even after the bodies died. I thought. He covers his face. I thought I could play God and fix my mistake. The confession hangs in the air. Through the glass, Tanaka hears Dr. Chen's sharp intake of breath. And when you finally shut it down, their bodies were gone. Not dead gone. Empty gone. No brain activity, no neural response. Just meat and bone with nobody home. I checked vitals on everyone. Tried CPR on Webb. Tried the defibrillator from medical on Moss. Nothing. They were still broadcasting from the other side, but there was nowhere for them to come back to. Tanaka pulls out the audio analysis report. The transmission we found. The one that was erased. You did that. I had to. It described what was happening. Webb's voice, telling command that we'd opened something, that men were disappearing into light. If that got out, they'd shut down Northgard completely. I needed time to find a reversal, so I erased it and ran. And the blood trail? Reyes pulls up his sleeve, revealing a long scar on his forearm. I cut myself opening the emergency exit. Panicked. Didn't even feel it until I was a mile into the trees. The pieces lock into place with sickening clarity. Not a monster. Just a man who prioritized discovery over duty, curiosity over compassion, who made a choice in a moment of crisis and then spent 17 years trying to unmake it. "The rifle you took," Tanaka says. "Where is it?" "Salcha River, 3 miles downstream from my shelter, under a cairn of rocks. I brought it for protection, but every time I looked at it, I thought about using it differently." Tanaka stands. "Vincent Reyes, I'm placing you under arrest for 31 counts of criminally negligent homicide." He doesn't resist as she cuffs him, just nods slowly, as if he's been waiting 17 years to hear those words. "They deserved better than me," he says quietly. "Webb kept telling me to shut it down." Even from the other side, his voice came through, begging me to close the door. I heard him, and I ignored him. That's not science. That's murder by cowardice. Back in the observation room, Dr. Chen is pale. He believes every word. I know. Tanaka watches Reyes being led away, his shoulders finally relaxing as if the weight is lifting. Question is whether belief equals truth. The chemical samples are real. The modifications to the equipment are real. The bodies died exactly as he described. No trauma, simultaneous failure. But voices in the static? Consciousness realms? That's not evidence. Dr. Chen closes her notepad. 3 days ago, you would have said finding 31 skeletons arranged in their final positions after 17 years was impossible. Maybe we need to expand our definition of evidence. Tanaka's phone buzzes. The forensics team at Reyes' shelter. They found something else under the floorboards. Not chemicals this time. A second notebook. Older than the first, pages water-stained and brittle. The handwriting is different. Careful, methodical, decorated with small sketches in the margins. Lieutenant Marcus Webb's personal log. The entry, dated October 13, 1987, makes her blood run cold. Reyes is planning something. He won't say what, but I've seen him modifying the transmitter after hours. Claims he's just optimizing the signal, but the frequencies he's using aren't in our parameters. I ordered him to stop. He smiled and said it was too late, that we'd already made contact, that something was listening, that tomorrow night he'd prove Northgard's potential beyond anything Command imagined. I'm filing a report in the morning. Whatever he's planning, I won't let him endanger this platoon. The log ends there. Webb never got his morning. Tanaka stares at the words, then looks back at the holding cell where Reyes sits motionless, eyes closed, lips moving in a silent count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The same rhythm his fingers drummed on the table. The same pattern Dr. Chen's audio equipment picked up from the recovered static. 7 distinct pulses, repeating endlessly. She pulls out her phone, calls the forensics lead. "The radio equipment from FOB Kraken. I need it functional. I don't care how many parts you have to. Replace." Tanaka's office in the federal building smelled like burnt coffee and recycled air. It was past midnight again. She'd lost count of how many nights she'd spent here, the city lights of Anchorage reflecting off glass towers outside while she excavated the past. The declassified DARPA files had arrived that afternoon in 3 sealed boxes, each requiring a signature and thumbprint. Most of the pages were heavily redacted, black bars obliterating sentences, entire paragraphs, sometimes whole pages. But what remained was enough. Project Northgard. Authorized September 1985. Objective: explore quantum entanglement applications for military communications using Alaska's unique electromagnetic environment. Principal Technical Specialist, SSG Vincent Reyes. She flipped through personnel evaluations, requisition forms for equipment that shouldn't have existed in 1987, correspondence between DARPA liaisons and Army brass. The official story was atmospheric research. The reality, buried in technical appendices she barely understood, involved consciousness frequency synchronization, and dimensional membrane permeability testing. Her brother had almost been there. The thought kept surfacing, unwelcome and sharp. James had been offered a transfer to Kraken in August 1987. He'd declined, choosing Germany instead. Said he wanted beer halls, not frozen tundra. She still sent him birthday cards. The radiostatic case evidence sat on her desk. The master recording, copied and analyzed by 3 separate labs. Beneath Lieutenant Webb's final words, recovered fragments whispered in frequencies that shouldn't register on standard equipment. Voices. Plural. None identified as second platoon members. And the breathing. That perfect synchronization. 31 rhythms as one. A knock startled her. She glanced at the clock. 12:47 a.m. Special Agent Marcus Hoffman stuck his head through the door, holding 2 folders. "Thought you'd still be here." "What have you got?" He set the folders down. "Personal journals. Found with the remains. Took forensics forever to separate the pages. 17 years of moisture and decay." Tanaka opened the first one. PFC Danny Moss's handwriting. Cramped and earnest. She skimmed entries about homesickness, card games, the cold. Then, September 23, 1987. Reyes has been acting strange, spending hours in the comm building after shifts. Says he's tuning the equipment. Staff Sergeant says we're helping with atmospheric research, but I heard Webb and Reyes arguing yesterday. Webb wanted to shut something down. Reyes said they were so close to breakthrough. October 7th. Had the dream again. We all had it. Asked around at breakfast. Same exact dream. We were standing in a circle, holding hands, and the sky was opening up like a mouth. Reyes said it was just shared stress, bunking in close quarters, but his eyes looked excited, not worried, like he wanted us to keep dreaming it. October 13th. Webb ordered Reyes to stop. The experiments. Direct order. But I saw Reyes in the comm building tonight when I couldn't sleep. The equipment was humming, making my teeth ache. He looked up at me through the window and smiled. There was something wrong with that smile. The entry ended there. Hoffman pointed to the second folder. Specialist James Coe kept one too. Technical observations mostly, he had engineering background. But the last week, his entries get... Tanaka opened it. Coe's writing was precise, almost architectural. October 10. The modifications Reyes made to the transmitter array violate every protocol I know. The antenna configuration shouldn't work. It's broadcasting into frequency ranges marked void on all standard charts. Asked Reyes about it. He said, "Empty frequencies are just frequencies no one's listening to yet." October 12th. Shared consciousness event during breakfast. All 32 of us stopped eating at the exact same moment. Looked north simultaneously. We could feel something out there, aware, watching, waiting for us to notice it noticing us. The sensation lasted maybe 5 seconds. When it broke, Moss dropped his coffee cup. No one talked about it, but we all knew. October 14th, 0900 hours. Webb and Reyes had a physical confrontation in the comm building. Webb threatened to report him to command. Reyes said it was too late, that the bridge was already forming, and shutting it down now would be worse than completing the experiment. Webb ordered the base on lockdown. Reyes agreed, but I saw him smile again. That wrong smile. October 14th, 2100 hours. Aurora is circling the base, not moving across the sky, circling. The equipment in the comm building is screaming at frequencies I can hear inside my skull. Reyes just activated something. The air tastes like copper and ozone and something else, something that isn't from here. The handwriting deteriorated into a legible scrawl. The final line barely readable. Door opening. Door opening. Door opening. We see it. We all see it. We are nothing after that. Tanaka closed the folder carefully. These were authenticated? Forensics confirmed the paper, ink, everything. Written before the incident. Ko's last entry was maybe an hour before Webb's final transmission. She stood, moving to the window. Downtown Anchorage glittered below, oblivious. Somewhere out there, Vincent Reyes sat in a holding cell, probably not sleeping. We need to talk to him again. It's almost 1 a.m. He doesn't sleep either. I've been watching the cell cameras. The interview room was smaller than the interrogation suite, deliberately intimate. Reyes sat across from Tanaka, his frostbitten hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of water he hadn't touched. He looked worse than 3 days ago, shadows under his eyes, a tremor in his jaw. Tanaka laid the journals on the table between them. PFC Moss and Specialist Ko kept records. Want to explain these? Reyes stared at the folders but didn't reach for them. Remember, those notebooks. Ko was always writing. Moss, too. They describe experiments you were running, unauthorized modifications to communications equipment, shared consciousness events among the platoon. Yes, Lieutenant Webb ordered you to stop. You refused. Reyes's jaw tightened. I didn't refuse. I told him it was too late. Why was it too late? For a long moment, Reyes said nothing. Then, when you start tuning human consciousness to the frequency realm, the realm starts tuning back. It's not passive. It's reciprocal. The bridge forms from both sides. Tanaka pulled out a technical schematic recovered from his shelter. This describes equipment that didn't exist in 1987. Where did you get these designs? I made them. With what knowledge? Your military training was in basic radio operation. This is quantum-level engineering. Reyes looked directly at her for the first time. The realm teaches you. When you're close enough to the doorway, knowledge bleeds through. It showed me what to build. So, you're claiming an extra-dimensional entity gave you advanced technology. Not gave, showed. There's a difference. He leaned forward slightly. Agent Tanaka, have you ever stood next to something so vast it makes you feel like an ant? Not afraid. Just aware of how small you are? That's what the realm is. Consciousness without limit. No bodies, no barriers. Pure awareness. And you wanted to send 31 men there. I wanted to bridge to it. To prove we could touch something beyond ourselves. His voice cracked. I thought we'd be able to come back. Tanaka slid another document across. The forensic analysis of the blood trail. This is your blood. O-negative, confirmed DNA match. It leads from the communications building to the tree line and stops. No drag marks, no disturbance. Deposited after the storm. Reyes stared at it. You were wounded, Tanaka continued. You walked away from the base after they died. Why? I couldn't stay. Because of guilt? Because I could still hear them. His voice dropped to a whisper. In the static. Calling for me. Asking why I didn't shut it down in time. Tanaka opened the final folder, the one she'd been saving. We analyzed your wilderness shelter. Found chemical synthesis equipment. Lab-grade precision. The compound in 2nd Platoon's bones matches samples you stored there. 17 years old. Reyes nodded slowly. That compound didn't exist until 2003, so either you invented it in 1987 using knowledge that shouldn't have been available, or, she paused, or you administered something else and were misidentifying the residue. It's the same compound. I synthesized it in 87. Why? It facilitated the consciousness transfer, made neural tissue more receptive to the frequency shift. He looked at his hands. They needed it to survive the doorway opening. Without it, their minds would have shredded. So you drugged them. I saved them from worse. His voice rose. Do you understand what happens when raw consciousness touches that realm without preparation? It doesn't translate. It dissolves. They would have stopped existing entirely. At least this way they're somewhere. Tanaka felt cold. Did they consent? Silence. Did you tell them what you were doing, Sergeant Reyes? They knew we were testing advanced communications. That's not what I asked. Reyes closed his eyes. No, they didn't know the full scope. Because you knew they'd refuse. Because they wouldn't understand the opportunity. Tanaka stood, gathering the files. In 3 hours, federal prosecutors are filing charges. 31 counts of criminally negligent homicide. Your attorney will argue PTSD, isolation syndrome, diminished capacity. But these journals prove premeditation. The compound proves you knowingly administered substances without consent. The modified equipment proves you deliberately created the conditions that killed them. I didn't kill them. I trapped them. Functionally identical, Sergeant? No. He looked up, eyes desperate. Dead means gone forever. Trapped means they're still there. Still conscious. Still waiting. Waiting for what? For someone, the rain. Hammered anchorage in sheets that turned the streets to mirrors. Inside the federal detention facility on 4th Avenue, the overhead lights buzzed like trapped insects. Claire Tanaka's boots squeaked against the polished linoleum as she followed the guard down the corridor toward the secure interview room. 3 months into Vincent Reyes's pretrial detention, and still the case refused to settle into comfortable certainty. She carried a manila folder thick with inconsistencies. The guard unlocked the reinforced door. Reyes sat at the bolted table, hands cuffed to a belly chain, his missing fingers forming gaps on his left hand like broken piano keys. He'd aged a decade in 90 days. The orange jumpsuit hung loose on his frame. Agent Tanaka. His voice was steady. Too steady for a man facing 31 counts of negligent homicide. You found something. She slid the folder across the table. Tell me about these. The first photograph showed blueprints, intricate schematics for electromagnetic resonance equipment. Reyes's handwriting crawled in the margins, equations spiraling into complexity that made her eyes hurt. The second photo captured similar diagrams, but these were from DARPA archives dated 1993. 6 years after Phoebe Kraken fell silent. Where did you get these designs, Vincent? He studied the images with the detached interest of a man reviewing grocery receipts. I told you, the frequency realm. It doesn't experience time the way we do. Information flows differently there. Your defense attorney wants me to believe you're suffering from PTSD-induced psychosis. Tanaka pulled out another sheet, a psychiatric evaluation from Dr. Sarah Chen. That 17 years alone in the wilderness broke your mind, created elaborate fantasies to cope with survivor's guilt. But you don't believe that. Not a question. I believe you're the smartest person I've ever interrogated. She tapped the schematics. These would take a team of physicists to generate. Yet, according to Alaska State Library records, you checked out books on basic radio theory, wilderness survival guides, geology texts. Nothing that would give you this level of expertise. Reyes leaned back as far as the chains allowed. You're looking for a simpler answer. The crazy hermit who murdered his platoon and spent 17 years justifying it with science fiction. Did you? Kill them? His eyes held hers. In the harsh fluorescent light, she could see every line etched by wind and cold and guilt. Yes, just not how you think. Tanaka pulled out the next document, a forensic timeline. The blood trail from the communications building. O negative, matching your type. But the coagulation analysis shows it was deposited 12 to 18 hours after the platoon disappeared. You stayed. You had time to shut down the equipment immediately, but you waited. 72 hours. His voice dropped. I monitored their vitals through the equipment. Watched their bodies shut down system by system. Recorded every frequency shift, every consciousness fluctuation. I told myself I was gathering data to reverse the process. But really... He closed his eyes. I just wanted to know if it was real, if we'd actually done it. Done what? Killed them? Opened a door that should have stayed closed. Tanaka spread more photos across the table. Images from Reyes's wilderness shelter that search teams had finally located 3 weeks ago, 70 miles northwest of Kraken. Not the primitive camp of a fugitive, but a workshop. Radio equipment salvaged from who knew where, jury-rigged into configurations that made the FBI's technical team nervous. Notebooks filled with equations, and samples, carefully preserved vials of the same compound found in 2nd Platoon's bones. You synthesized this. She pointed to the chemical analysis. With 1987 technology, in a wilderness shelter, that's what our chemists say. I had help. Reyes's mouth twisted. Instructions. The realm doesn't just receive consciousness, it responds, especially to prolonged exposure. Every year I went back to Kraken on October 14th, set up receivers, listened to them breathing in that static void, and sometimes there were other sounds, sequences, patterns. You're saying the frequency realm taught you chemistry? I'm saying something in there wanted the doorway kept open, and I was weak enough to listen. The rain intensified, drumming against the single, reinforced window. Tanaka pulled out her final document, the one that had brought her here tonight. A stack of incident reports from 4 different military installations. Fort Richardson, outside Anchorage, Eielson Air Force Base near Fairbanks, a communications relay station in Bethel, a Coast Guard outpost in Valdez. You worked at all of these, 1989 to 2003, civilian radio technician, excellent references. You never stayed more than 3 years. Reyes said nothing, but his breathing changed, shallower, controlled. 3 soldiers went missing during your tenure, always during electromagnetic storms, always off duty, alone, always near communications equipment you had access to. She spread the reports like playing cards. PFC Sarah Martinez, Fort Richardson, 1991. Specialist Thomas Chen, Eielson, 1996. Petty Officer 3rd Class David Kowalski, Valdez, 2001. Coincidence? His voice had gone flat. Is it? Tanaka leaned forward. Because when I pulled your employment records, I found something interesting. You requested transfers to each location based on unusual electromagnetic activity in the area. Aurora, strength. Geomagnetic readings. You were hunting for the right conditions. To bring them back, Reyes said softly. 2nd Platoon. I thought if I could recreate the resonance, find the exact frequency combination, or send others through to keep them company. The words hung in the stale air. Reyes's hands tightened around the edge of the table until his knuckles went white. That's what you think? That I deliberately... I think you've been obsessed with that doorway for 17 years. I think you convinced yourself the platoon is alive in some dimension you can barely describe. And I think when you couldn't bring them back, you started wondering if you could send them companions instead. No. But his voice wavered. The others, those were accidents. Resonance feedback. I was testing equipment, trying to isolate the frequency band, and they were too close when the field activated. 3 separate accidents at 3 different installations? Tanaka pulled out another folder. We found your notebooks, Vincent. All of them. The search team spent 2 weeks in that shelter. You kept records of every test, every attempt to recreate the Kraken event, and in the margins of your 1996 journal, dated October 12th, 2 days before Specialist Chen disappeared, you wrote something. She slid the photocopy across. Reyes's handwriting filled the page, equations intersecting with desperate prose, but circled in the bottom corner, underlined 3 times. If I can't close the door, I can widen it. His face crumpled. You're taking that out of context. I meant, what did you mean? Because 6 hours after you wrote that, Thomas Chen walked into a communications bunker during a geomagnetic storm and was never seen again. His body was never found, just like Martinez, just like Kowalski, just like 2nd Platoon. Tanaka's voice hardened. How many people have you fed to that doorway, Vincent? I didn't feed anyone to anything. He surged against the chains, the table bolts groaning. Those soldiers weren't victims. They were volunteers. I explained what happened at Kraken. Showed them the calculations. They understood the risk, the possibility of consciousness transfer, and they chose to help. To see if we could make contact, establish communication protocols, maybe even retrieve 2nd Platoon from the other side. So you admit it. You deliberately exposed them. Reyes slumped back. The fight drained out of him as quickly as it had flared. I exposed myself first. Every time. Stood in the resonance field longer than anyone. But my consciousness won't transfer. I don't know why. Maybe because I was shielded during the original event. Maybe because I'm already too entangled with this reality. Or maybe... He laughed, a broken sound. Maybe because I'm being punished, forced to keep opening doors while watching everyone else walk through. Tanaka studied him. The overhead lights flickered, and for a moment his shadow seemed to move independently, reaching toward the window where rain traced patterns like static interference. Your defense attorney is arguing PTSD and isolation syndrome, she said quietly, that years alone fractured your grip on reality, made you believe in things that don't exist. If you maintain this story, frequency realms, consciousness transfer, interdimensional communication, the prosecution will use it to prove premeditation instead of negligence. You'll get life without parole instead of 20 years. I know. Then why not take the simpler path? Admit you experimented with chemicals that went wrong, that you panicked when your platoon died and ran, that isolation drove you to create an elaborate justification. The jury might show mercy. Reyes met her eyes. Because it's still open, the doorway. And every year on October 14th it gets a little wider. Every consciousness that passes through reinforces the frequency pathway, makes it easier for something else to come back the other way. In 43 days, it'll be the 18th anniversary. The signal will be stronger than ever. Vincent, you think I'm insane. Maybe I am. But when you hear that transmission at Kraken, and you will, because you won't be able to help yourself, you'll understand. They're not just breathing anymore. They're building something. And whatever's on the other side of that frequency threshold, it's very patient. It's been waiting for someone to build a bridge, and I handed it the materials. Tanaka closed the folders. The trial starts in 6 weeks. Your attorney wants to negotiate a plea. Criminally negligent homicide for 2nd Platoon, no charges for the others due to lack of bodies or evidence. You'd be eligible for parole in 25 years. And the investigation into the missing soldiers? Remains open, but without bodies, without witnesses, without any evidence beyond circumstantial patterns. She shrugged, the weight of the case settling like the rain outside. The radio equipment squats on cracked concrete like a mechanical scarecrow, its wiring spilling from gutted casings into the weeds. Vincent Reyes's hands move across the connections with muscle memory that defies 17 years of absence, twisting corroded terminals, bypassing dead circuits. Above FOB Kraken, the aurora begins its slow swirl, green curtains gathering into something that doesn't belong in any meteorology textbook. You can't seriously believe this will work. Agent Tanaka stands 10 feet back, arms crossed against the October chill. 3 FBI agents flank her, hands near sidearms. The Anchorage U.S. Attorney's Office sent 2 observers who huddle by the vehicles, recording everything on handheld cameras. Reyes doesn't look up from his work. His breath fogs in the twilight air. You brought me here. To see if you'd confess. Her voice carries an edge that cuts through the wind. Not to conduct some seance. It's not a seance. Reyes connects a final wire, then straightens, wincing. His back hasn't forgiven the wilderness years. It's resonance. Same frequency they were tuned to 18 years ago. If any part of their consciousness remains coherent in that realm, they'll respond. The trial starts in 4 weeks. The prosecution has 31 counts of criminally negligent homicide ready. Reyes's defense team wants him evaluated again. 3rd opinion, maybe 4th. But Reyes himself demanded this trip, threatened to stop cooperating unless they brought him here on the anniversary. The exact hour. Tanaka agreed because she needs to know. Not for the trial, for herself. The equipment hums to life, drawing power from the portable generator one of the agents hauled up from the vehicles. Old vacuum tubes glow orange in the gathering dark. Reyes adjusts dials with fingers missing their tips, frostbite casualties from his first winter in the bush. 147 hours, he says quietly. 6 minutes. Tanaka checks her watch. Around them, the ruins of FOB Kraken settle into shadow. The mess hall roof collapsed years ago, black spruce growing through the beams. The barracks lean like drunks. Only the communications building still stands mostly intact, though saplings push through cracks in the foundation. 31 skeletons came out of these buildings last year. 31 families finally got remains to bury. The funerals stretched across September. Ohio, California, Texas, New York. Tanaka attended 3 of them. Listened to mothers who'd spent 17 years not knowing become mothers who'd spend the rest of their lives wishing they still didn't. "What do you expect to happen?" she asks. "I don't expect anything." Reyes crouches by the equipment, eyes on the frequency display. "I've been doing this alone for 17 years. Every October 14th, I come back, set up my gear, listen. And they're always there." His voice drops. Breathing, waiting, getting stronger. One of the agents shifts his weight, gravel crunching. The sound carries in the stillness. No birds, no wind through the trees, just the generator's steady growl and the equipment's electric whisper. Tanaka thinks about the recovered transmission fragments. 31 voices speaking in perfect unison beneath the static, reciting coordinates that led to an unexplained metallic anomaly 100 feet underground 70 miles from here. The site the EPA fenced off without explanation. She thinks about the compound in the bones, synthesized with equipment that shouldn't exist in 1987, about the library footage showing Reyes copying equations years before he claimed to receive them, about her brother James turning down the Kraken posting, taking Germany instead, living through a normal career, retiring last year to Montana. If he'd made a different choice, his bones might have been skeleton number 32. 249, Reyes says. The aurora intensifies overhead. Not normal behavior. Tanaka's seen aurora before, sheets and ribbons that flow across the sky. This moves differently, circular, descending. The same pattern described in Colonel Vickers' sealed diary, the one she spent 3 weeks of favors to access. "We should," one of the attorneys starts. "Stay quiet." Tanaka cuts him off. She steps closer to the equipment. "What frequency are you on?" "Military band. Same one we used for Project Northgard." Reyes adjusts a dial. "The official frequencies are just for communication. This one is for consciousness, for tuning human neural patterns to electromagnetic fields." "That's not possible." "It wasn't supposed to be." His scarred hands steady on the controls. "But we did it anyway. DARPA wanted telepathic soldiers, instant battlefield communication without radios. We gave them a doorway instead." The generator coughs, sputters, catches again. The attorney's cameras whir softly. 241. Tanaka's watch confirms it. The aurora now forms a distinct column directly above them, green light bleeding through the trees. It illuminates the compound in ghostly radiance. Shadows twist wrong. The air tastes like copper and ozone. She should stop this, should pull Reyes away from the equipment, get everyone back to the vehicles, file a report about a mentally ill subject attempting to validate his delusions. That's what the book says. That's what makes sense. But she doesn't move. "When the door opened," Reyes says, eyes on the glowing tubes, "I felt them go through. Not saw, felt. Like part of me was being pulled out through my skull. But I had shielding. Unauthorized modifications I'd made to protect myself while I worked. They didn't. Their consciousness just streamed out into something vast, something that had been waiting. And you kept it open for 3 days. 72 hours. His voice cracks. Taking readings, recording data, thinking I could understand it, map it, maybe even reverse it if I gathered enough information. While they died, while their bodies died, their consciousness, 153. The word drops like a stone into still water for 5 seconds. Nothing happens. The generator hums. The aurora swirls. Tanaka's heart pounds against her ribs. Then the radio erupts. Not static, not voices. Sound that bypasses ears entirely and resonates in bone, in teeth, in the small spaces behind the eyes. A harmonic that shouldn't exist. 31 distinct tones braided into one impossible chord. The attorneys stumble backward. One agent doubles over, hands pressed to his temples. Tanaka stays standing through will alone, every instinct screaming to run. The harmonic shifts. Patterns emerge. Not words, but something underneath words. Something that predates language. Coordinates forming in her mind without being spoken. Numbers crystallizing in her thoughts like ice. Then, cutting through it all, a single voice. Familiar from recovered recordings. Lieutenant Marcus Webb. "Tanaka!" Her legs nearly buckle. The voice doesn't come from the radio, it comes from everywhere, from the air itself. "Claire Tanaka, you're James's sister." She manages to nod, though no one here can see what's speaking. "He was supposed to come here. We met him in processing. He chose Germany." The harmonic swells beneath the words, 30 other voices providing foundation. "You want to know what happened to us?" "Yes." Her own voice sounds distant. "Vincent didn't kill us. He trapped us." Reyes rocks forward on his knees, face in his hands. The radio equipment glows brighter, tubes burning white-hot. "We're still conscious, still aware, but not in bodies, not in space, in frequency, in resonance, in the space between carrier waves and nothing." The aurora column tightens above them, a focused beam of light drilling down. He kept the door open because he wanted to know, to understand. He chose knowledge over our lives, and now we're here, in a place that's infinite and empty, waiting. For what? Tanaka forces the question out. For him to close the door, or for enough others to join us that we can open it from this side. One of the attorneys vomits. The sound is distant, unimportant. "We told him the first year, told him every year, but he can't close it. The equations only work one way. You can open a door, you can walk through, but you can't unmake the threshold." Reyes lifts his face. Tears cut tracks through the grime. "I tried," he whispers. "I spent 17 years trying." "We know," Webb's voice answers. "We watched you try. We felt every experiment, every test subject." Tanaka's blood turns to ice water. Test subjects: Sarah Martinez, Thomas Chen, David Kowalski. The names emerge from the harmonic, each syllable perfectly clear, and 6 others whose names he never learned, who he grabbed from other bases, other installations, exposed to the same frequencies, trying to recreate the resonance, trying to find a way to pull us back. Or send more through, Tanaka says. Silence, not empty, full of 31 presences listening. "Both," Webb finally says. He thought if enough consciousness entered the realm, it might stabilize, create a bridge strong enough to travel both ways. He thought he could save us by damning others. Reyes doesn't deny it, just kneels in the dirt, body racked with sobs that make no sound. "But the door only widens," Webb continues. "Every consciousness that passes through makes it easier for the next. And the realm, it has attention now. It knows we're here. It's curious. What is it?" The question escapes before Tanaka can stop it. We don't know. We can't perceive it directly, but it's vast, patient, and it's learning from us, learning what consciousness feels like, what it can do. The harmonic swells. The column of light brightens. In its glow, Tanaka sees shapes, human-shaped voids in the aurora, 31 figures standing in formation the way soldiers stand, waiting for orders that will never come. "Shut it down," Webb says. "Shut down the equipment before—" The transmission cuts. Not fade out, not interference, just— The confession chamber felt smaller with every breath Vincent Reyes took. Morning light filtered through the reinforced window of the Anchorage FBI field office, casting bars of shadow across the metal table where his weathered hands lay flat, fingers splayed like a man trying to hold on to something slipping away. Special Agent Claire Tanaka studied him from across the table, the recording device's red light pulsing steadily between them. She'd slept maybe 3 hours after returning from FOB Kraken, but exhaustion sharpened her focus rather than dulling it. The voices from last night still echoed in her mind. 31 soldiers speaking in perfect unison, Lieutenant Webb's accusation cutting through the harmonic like a blade. "Tell me again," she said quietly. "From the beginning, no more fragments." Reyes closed his eyes. When he opened them, they held something beyond resignation. Relief, maybe, or surrender. October 14th, 1987. The equipment was ready by 1800 hours. I'd been preparing for weeks. Unauthorized modifications to the Northgard transmitters, frequency calibrations that shouldn't have been possible with what we had. His voice carried the flat tone of a man who'd rehearsed this confession for 17 years. Webb knew something was wrong. He ordered me to shut it down the day before. I told him I would. But you didn't. The storm came like it was summoned. The aurora. I'd been tracking the patterns, waiting for optimal conditions. When I saw it forming over the base, I knew we'd never get another chance like that. He paused, swallowing hard. I activated the full array at 21:47. Tanaka made a note of the time. 6 minutes before Webb's final transmission. What happened in those 6 minutes? The resonance built slowly at first. The men started feeling it. Headaches, disorientation, that sense of being watched. Webb came to the communications building, found me at the controls. He ordered me to abort. Reyes's jaw tightened. I told him it was too late to stop safely. That was the first lie. The second? That I didn't know what would happen next. His eyes met hers. I knew exactly what would happen. I'd run smaller tests on myself for months. Brief exposures, never more than 30 seconds. I knew the consciousness transfer was possible. I just didn't know if it was reversible. The words hung in the air like a verdict. "You used your entire platoon as test subjects," Tanaka said. Webb tried to pull the main breaker. The resonance was too strong by then. It threw him back across the room. He was shouting into the radio when it happened. 21:53. The doorway opened fully. Reyes's voice dropped to a whisper. "You have to understand, Agent Tanaka. What came through that opening, it wasn't hostile. It was curious. It was vast. It was everything the project promised and more. And 31 men died for your curiosity. Not immediately." He looked down at his hands. "That's the worst part. Their bodies didn't fail right away. The consciousness transfer left them, empty. Breathing, hearts beating, but nobody home. I watched their vitals on the monitoring equipment. Normal at first, then deteriorating as the hours passed." Tanaka felt something cold settle in her chest. "How long did you watch?" 72 hours. 3 days. His voice cracked. "I kept thinking they'd snap back, that their consciousness would find its way home once the resonance faded. But the doorway, it was self-sustaining. The more awareness it pulled through, the stronger it became." "So you just observed?" "I documented everything. Took readings every 15 minutes. Recorded the frequencies I could detect from the other side. They were still there, Agent Tanaka. I could feel them in the static, sense their thoughts bleeding through the carrier signal. They were trying to come back, but they didn't know how." "And you couldn't tell them?" "I tried." His composure finally shattered. "God, I tried. I spent the first 24 hours attempting every reversal protocol I could think of. But I designed the system for one-way transfer. Opening the door was easy. Closing it required knowledge I didn't have." Tanaka leaned forward. "Knowledge you claim you received later from the frequency realm." "Yes, but too late." Reyes wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand. "By the time their bodies started dying, respiratory failure, cardiac arrest, neurological shutdown, I understood what I'd done. I'd trapped them in a state of pure consciousness without any anchor back to physical reality." "When did the last one die?" 49 hours in, PFC Moss. I was holding his hand when his heart stopped. The words came out thick with grief. They all died alone except for that. I made sure someone was there for each one. "How compassionate," Tanaka said, not bothering to hide her contempt. "I know how it sounds. I know. what I am. Reyes met her gaze steadily. I'm not asking for understanding. I'm trying to give you the truth. She let the silence stretch, watching him. Outside, Anchorage was waking up. Traffic sounds, distant sirens, the ordinary rhythm of a city going about its day. Inside this room, a man was confessing to something that shouldn't be possible. What about the bodies? She finally asked. I positioned them where they'd fallen. Most were already at their stations when the transfer happened. That's why they looked so normal when the search team arrived. I only had to move 3 of them. He paused. I left them looking peaceful. It seemed like the least I could do. And then you erased the transmission. 73 hours after activation. I shut down the equipment, destroyed my research notes, wiped the radio logs. I knew they'd find the bodies eventually. The base was isolated but not abandoned. I needed to disappear before that happened. Tanaka pulled out a folder, spreading photographs across the table. Explain the blood trail. Reyes touched one of the images, the dark stain leading from the communications building to the tree line. When Webb tried to stop me, I grabbed him. We struggled. He had his service weapon. I didn't mean to. He stopped, swallowed. The shot grazed my side. Not fatal, but I bled. A lot. So, you were wounded when you fled. I made it 12 miles before I had to stop and treat it. Found an old trapper's cabin, cauterized the wound with a heated knife blade. Stayed there 6 days before I was strong enough to move again. His fingers traced the scar through his shirt. It got infected. I nearly died that first winter. But you didn't. You survived 17 years in the Alaskan wilderness. Survival isn't the same as living, Agent Tanaka. She changed direction. The chemical compound in the bones, the one that didn't exist in 1987. I synthesized it myself, small batches over several months, using the frequencies from the realm to guide the molecular assembly. It was supposed to facilitate the transfer, make their consciousness more adaptable to the new state. His laugh was bitter. Instead, it just crystallized in their bones as they died, a monument to my arrogance. You administered it without their knowledge. I put it in the coffee, the water supply. Everyone on base was dosed by mid-September. He looked away. Webb suspected something. Some of the men were having shared dreams, synchronized thoughts. He started keeping a log. Tanaka pulled out Webb's recovered journal, its pages stained but legible. This log? Reyes flinched at the sight of it. Where did you find that? Under the floorboards of your shelter, along with schematics, frequency calculations, and a very interesting list of dates and locations. His face went pale. 4 military installations. Tanaka continued, her voice hardening. 1989 to 2003. Civilian radio technician positions, and 9 soldiers, who disappeared during electromagnetic storms while you were working there. She laid out more photographs, service portraits of young men and women who'd vanished without trace. Sarah Martinez, Thomas Chen, David Kowalski. Want to tell me about them? Reyes's silence stretched for nearly a minute. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. They volunteered. Did they? I told them about the realm, about the consciousness waiting there. Some of them, they were lost, broken, looking for something beyond the ordinary. I offered them a doorway. You offered them death. I offered them transcendence. The fact that their bodies couldn't sustain the transfer, that was a flaw in the process, not the intent. Tanaka stood, chair scraping against linoleum. You're a serial killer who dressed up murder as enlightenment. I'm a scientist who opened a door humanity wasn't ready for. Reyes looked up at her, eyes blazing with something between madness and conviction. The realm is real, Agent Tanaka. You heard them last night. 31 voices, and 9 more beneath them, harmonizing. They're all there, waiting, learning, becoming something we can't comprehend. And you wanted to join them. Every single day for 17 years. His voice broke again. But I was too much of a coward. I kept myself anchored here, tethered to the guilt and the possibility that I could find a way to bring them back. By sending more people through, by trying to widen the doorway enough for two-way passage. If enough consciousness transferred, the resonance might stabilize. Create a bridge that worked in both directions. Instead, you just fed more victims to whatever's on the other side. Reyes slumped in his chair. Yes. Tanaka gathered the photographs, sliding them back into the folder. The U.S. Attorney will add 9 counts of first-degree murder to your charges. The evidence from your shelter, the journals, the frequency logs, the synthesized compound, it all proves premeditation. I know. Your trial starts in 4 weeks. You're looking at multiple life sentences. I know. She moved toward the door, then stopped. One more thing. The coordinates Webb's voice transmitted last night.